Hey guys, welcome back to an interesting video on Wild Rift. So today we're back with the tier list for patch 4.4a, and honestly, I mainly wanted to make this video to focus on ADCs because a lot of my opinions have changed, especially with the Runance changes as well. But mainly aside from ADCs, the main change is Crown, of course, getting nerfed, and Twitch Jungle, or AP Twitch in particular, getting nerfed. So we're going to be focusing more on ADCs, but of course, despite that being said, of course, I will still cover every single role, but in the other roles, honestly, the tier list did not change all that much, as you guys can see here. So we're going to jump into the Baron lane first. So the main change in Baron lane is, of course, I'm going to talk about the champion changes as well. So in Baron lane, basically, the main change is I actually moved Gwen down in the S plus tier because I still believe she was really good. Like worthy of being in the S plus tier. I considered moving her down to S, but I really think that Gwen is quite a bit better than a lot of these champions, especially because of the fact that you know the strongest champions are Ornn, Garen, Wukong, and Sion, all champions that Gwen can kill easily because of her true damage. And even after that, we have the Renekton and Aatrox, etc. So the two buff champions are Fiora and Aatrox. Now I believe Fiora's buff was actually massive if you're a good Fiora player, which is why I moved Fiora pretty much to nearly the top of the S tier. And Aatrox, although his buffs were really big as well on his Q, but I didn't think that it was big enough to move him to the S plus tier or anything like that. There is a lethality Aatrox going around in both the Baron lane and the jungle, but it's more common in the jungle. Most Baron lane Aatrox still builds are normal tank, but we're going to talk about lethality Aatrox when I reach the jungle, which is pretty much just going to be now. So there is Lethality Aatrox at the bottom of the S tier in the jungle. So basically what's going on with Lethality Aatrox? Well, basically I think that it has the potential to be good, but basically Lethality Aatrox goes for you know the lethality items like Duskblade or Youmuu's, and like we basically just built lethality. So what this gives you is, number one, you can roam around the map really easily because of the extra movement speed, and number two, when you use your Q especially, the damage you do is insane. Like for example, your third charge of your Q, like on an ADC, can do like 75% of their health. It's absolutely insane. So you become kind of like a one-shotting machine. The issue is that it's really hard to play Lethality Aatrox because you have to land all your sweet spots to do the damage. And number two, you basically become, instead of a tanky assassin, I'm not tanky assassin, tanky frontline or fighter, you become like a really squishy like carry. So obviously if you're building full lethality, you don't have any tanky stats. You're basically gonna become like an assassin. You can one shot people, but you can get one shot yourself as well. So essentially that's just a different playstyle. So some other changes to the jungle. S plus tier remains the same. Nothing too big really happened up there. All the champions there are still strong. We have the addition of Nilah. So Nilah, I've actually put her in the middle of S tier. So I've played Nilah jungle a lot myself. There is two variations. The first one is the really offensive variation where you go for strike, you go for collector first item, and you go for like lethality boots, sudden impact, that kind of thing. So you're going for like a full one shot kind of snowball build, which if you snowball, you basically become unstoppable. Because Nilah, when you reach like full build or like nearly full build, you basically win like 1v1 or 1v2 against like everybody. The other build is a little bit more conservative, where you're building more like an ADC, like you're building Gluttonous Greaves and Bloodthirster with Conquer as your rune, that kind of thing. So basically, the benefit of that is in the jungle, Nilah can scale for free and doesn't have to play a hard lane against a ranged matchup. But whichever build you go, I think that Nilah as a champion is incredibly strong, even in the ADC role. But I think she's better in the jungle because you basically kind of ignore her weakness of the laning phase, where you can get very easily bullied. So another kind of big change is I pretty much just moved Twitch down to the bottom of A+, and the reason for this is obviously his clear now sucks. His AP build now is a lot worse compared to what it was because they nerfed all his ratios and stuff. But honestly, I still feel that Twitch jungle could work, especially in lower elos where people don't control. You can still make Twitch jungle work, you can still snowball, and it can still work. Whereas in higher elo, this is probably going to be a lot less successful because people are just going to control war, and you are a lot weaker in terms of stats now. So even if you snowball, you're going to have to snowball harder. If you're behind, you're going to be, you know, in big trouble basically. So those are pretty much the big changes of jungle, but let's talk about the mid lane. So with the mid lane, honestly only a couple of changes. So first up, I actually moved Yasuo up from S to S plus tier, and I was pretty surprised by this because honestly, I feel that Yasuo is actually a really strong champion right now. Despite the fact that obviously he's not a mage, he doesn't build crown, but um, honestly, he just does a lot of damage now, and you can go for, of course, two builds. The first one, of course, is the normal carry kind of Yasuo build, but of course, we also had the tank Yasuo build pretty much being popular for like quite a number of patches now, and it basically makes you really tanky and do a lot of damage at the same time. And then of course you have those kind of builds that's a hybrid between the two builds. Like I've seen Yasuo's go Bloodthirster into like Divine Sunderer, for example. So basically, Yasuo has multiple good builds now, and also of course the Yasuo is a champion that was pretty much like out when the game was released, and at this point there's quite a number of people who are pretty good on Yasuo already. So because of that, I think he looks like a lot stronger champion now, and yeah, pretty much that's why he's up there in the S plus tier. So another champ that I did push up in the rankings is going to be Fizz. So Fizz, I think I used to have him like B tier or something like that, but I moved him up to the top of A plus. Now I really don't quite think he's good enough to be in the S or the S plus tier, and the main reason for this is now Fizz pretty much, like with your first strike and your mage items and such, you're a lot stronger in the new mage items, obviously, because you get a lot more magic pen at the beginning of the game. However, I think the issue with Fizz is, number one, your lane is horrible. Like, you're gonna get bullied in lane because you have completely no range spells. You're 100% melee champion, which means you will never get push as well. So you never have priority, you'll always get bullied. Of course, unless you're playing against like a Kassadin or something, but otherwise you're always gonna get bullied. And number two, you pretty much have to snowball to be useful. Fizz is only useful if he's like 3-0 at the beginning of the game, and he can like pretty much just walk to the Dragon Lane and one shot the ADC, that kind of thing. He really isn't that useful if he's like 0-2. He walks to the Dragon Lane, he ults the ADC, he combos the ADC. ADC lives on like 1/4 health, flashes away, and he basically just ends up doing nothing. Or maybe the ADC doesn't need to flash away because he already used all his damage, so ADC walks away, and he basically did nothing here. So Fizz is kind of that kind of champion where you have to snowball in order to be useful, just based off the fact that he is an assassin. Of course, you can say a lot about the S plus tier champions like Akali or Zed, for example, but I feel that on Akali and Zed it's just so much easier to snowball compared to Fizz, which has such a hard time because it's not like you can just roam because you're always pushed in and you're just gonna get bullied in lane. So I think he's good but not great. So anyways, with that out the way, let's talk about supports. Okay, so with supports, there have been literally no changes at all in my tier list. I do not think any support has moved up or down in the slightest. Brand got like some damage buff, but who cares about that? He's still the same identity as a champion. We do have Yuumi and Janna getting nerfs, but Yuumi nerfs completely negligible. No one cares about Q damage and ult damage. Maybe Q damage could be a bit significant if you're going for Luden's build, but if you're going for full support build, like with your harmonic echoes and your flowing water, your ardent censer, no one cares about the damage on your Q and your ultimate, and that's not what makes Yuumi strong. Yuumi is still completely busted. So is of course Lux and Soraka. With Janna, the nerfs are quite major, I have to admit. However, it doesn't really change Janna as a champion in a sense that you really don't want, although a lot of people do this after Janna's review, but you really don't want to pick Janna into like a lane where where you're not trying to counter anyone. So for example, what I mean by this is you want to generally pick Janna against like engagers. So it's really useful against like a Leona, Alistar, or like other champions like that, like Lee Sin, Akali, those kind of champions. But you don't really want to pick Janna against like a Senna Ashe bot lane, for example. They're never gonna walk into you and they can just stay far away and just attack. They're not gonna get hit by a tornado in general. So Janna really is just trying to peel against engagers and assassins. So it still stays the same whether her shield is nerfed or not, for example. So honestly, I think that the double charge of the tornado and that's what and the low cooldown of it is really what makes Janna strong, in my opinion. It's not really the movement speed on her W or the shield on her E, which of course is amazing, but it's not the most important part of the reworked Janna. So I think that still remains the same, and pretty much everybody else, no one really got changes, and nothing in the meta pretty much changed within this small patch to really warrant anybody moving up or down in the support tier list. But now we're going to move on to the interesting one, which is going to be the ADCs. So for the ADC role, I've moved honestly a ton of champions. So we're gonna go through the tier list from top to the bottom. So first up, we have Kai'Sa and Tristana. I think Kai'Sa is hands down the best ADC in the game at the moment. Why? She has like literally like I think 4 or 5 different viable builds. So you can go for the full AD build, the Dust Blade into the full AD build, the Manamune into the full AP build, the Dust Blade into the full AP build as well, and you can of course just mix and match items at this point honestly. So Kai'Sa literally works in nearly every comp and nearly every matchup. There isn't really any kind of team comp you're playing with or against that Kai'Sa is bad in. Of course, if there are a lot of like CC and stuff, it's gonna be difficult. But honestly, that's gonna be difficult for any ADC, unless maybe you want to try to play with long range, like with Caitlyn, for example. So Kai'Sa, of course, I'm gonna be making videos on Kai'Sa and her builds really soon. But basically, Kai'Sa is the best ADC in my opinion, and then followed by Tristana. So Tristana, a little bit worse than Kai'Sa in my opinion because she's a little bit more variable. So, of course, we know she has a really strong early and late game with a mid game trough, but sometimes what happens on Tristana is you go in early game and then you catch like 1 or 2 deaths, and because of that, you basically become useless. So, that's of course a result of you trying to take advantage of your strong early game, but you end up dying, things go sideways, and you pretty much become useless until late game. So that's where the variation comes in. Whereas if you get fed in the early game, you get 1 or 2 kills and you start snowballing, and pretty much you're unstoppable, and you can even just kill people with just your auto attack without your bomb when you reach like a certain point in the game, which is bonkers. So next up we have the S tier. So S tier, we have Jinx. So Jinx, of course, you can go for like Bloodthirster into Runans. Although it by Jinx guide, I went for Runans last, but I think Bloodthirster into Runans now is probably the better way to go for Jinx, because Jinx takes advantage of the new Runans really well. So you have Bloodthirster into the new Runans, and Jinx is just a very strong hyper carry on the same kind of level as like Tristana and like Kai'Sa honestly. But the issue is with Jinx you have completely like no mobility. Your only peel is your traps, which is really hard to like activate. Whereas with Kai'Sa, you can ult away, you have invisibility. With Tristana, you can jump away, you can buster shot someone away. But with Jinx, if let's say enemy surprises you and jumps on you, the only thing you can do is to lay traps on yourself and try to root them for 1 second and try to run away with like your ghost or your flash, for example, which really cannot compare to Kai'Sa and Tristana's safety. So that's the only reason why Jinx is not in the S plus tier. But if you have Jinx with like Lulu, for example, or Jinx with like Janna, like someone who can protect you well, then Jinx is like S plus tier as well. So next up we have Caitlyn. So Caitlyn, of course, with the range is really strong, and of course with the new ADC items, like you can go for Bloodthirster. It's not new, but like the rework ADC items, you go for Bloodthirster, you go for Lethal Tempo, and you can basically just start destroying people from early on like you always have, but just even harder. And yeah, just really strong ADC at the moment. I have a lot of success with Caitlyn. You can also, of course, go for Lethality, Dust Blade into your Bloodthirster, which also works as well. Xayah, incredibly strong. Basically has the Tristana build of going for Bloodthirster like into Navori, and then IE or Blaster, for example, and it's just incredibly strong. But the main issue with Xayah is 2 things. Firstly, you generally only want to play her against comps that want to run into you to be able to get your root off. So number two, if you want to play Xayah in against any enemy team comp, then you have to have a lot of CC on your team comp. Like you need to play with an engager support, or you need to play with some kind of Baron laner or mid laner who has CC. If not, it's really difficult to land your feathers. Basically, all that's gonna happen is whenever you attack people, they're gonna run away, and you're never gonna be able to root anyone if these 2 conditions are not met. So simply based on the fact that you basically can only pick Xayah in certain matchups, I'm putting her a bit lower on the list. And not she would be like higher than Caitlyn probably not higher than Jinx, but higher than Caitlyn at least. So Jhin is just all around really solid. He is not really a hyper carry, but he kind of just does a lot of damage. Like your 4 shots hits like a truck. Of course you have that reload mechanic, but that's just part of Jhin. Really long ranges as well. He just pretty much is in a really good spot ever since they gave him that buff in like the ADC patch. So he's just sitting at the S tier, and the bottom of the S tier is Zeri. So Zeri, I feel that is good, but it's just not as good as like Kai'Sa, Jinx, and Tristana, because she's a hyper carry as well. She of course has to manually aim her auto attacks, and you have like kind of 2 builds with Zeri at the moment. You have of course your your Bloodthirster into Runan's kind of build, and you also have like a weird of course you also have the Manamune Triforce build. It's not, that part's not weird. We covered that before, but you also have like an AP part of the build where you go for like Crown and like Riftmaker. I'm gonna do a video on that eventually, but I've tried both builds. Both builds work pretty fine, but the main issue I feel with Zeri is that even when you're fed, even though when you're fed and you're doing a lot of damage, it still doesn't feel like you're doing a lot of damage. That's the really funny thing. Like, if you're 10 and 0 on Kai'Sa, Jinx, or Tristana, you're gonna start like pretty much just one-shotting people. Like, anyone who comes near you, you're basically like a turret and you're just destroying them. But with Zeri, when I'm 10 and 0, for example, and someone comes near me, I'm like throwing everything I have, and then I'm feeling like, why do I do so little damage when I'm so fed? Like, that's kind of the issue I have with Zeri. But then when I look at, like, for example, my damage after the game, it says like I did, 50% of the team's damage and something like that. But it just doesn't feel like it, and you can't just like really one-shot people. Like, Zeri really needs to be in those 5v5 team fights where she's able to stay at the back and DPS people for a long duration, which is why I feel that she's inferior to Tristana, Kai'Sa, and Jinx at the moment. Okay, so next up, surprise here is going to be Ashe. So Ashe, I've moved up from B all the way to the top of A+. Now, after the new like Bloodthirster and Runan's like situation comes in, I think Ashe is really strong because Ashe in lane is a huge bully because of her range. Like, most people don't know this, but Ashe destroys people in lane. Like, you can basically like not 100 to 0, but you can slowly chip away from 100 to 70% to 50%, and to the point that they're wondering what's going on, where's all my health going. She's super strong in the lane, really strong bully, and now of course she doesn't do as much damage as the champions above her, but with Bloodthirster, Runans, and such, she can do a lot of damage. Of course, you guys have already seen the Ashe video that I did quite a couple of days ago, that I got better than 100% Ashe. You guys saw the damage that she could do and things like that. So Ezreal, nothing changed about him, but the issue is that he cannot really build Bloodthirster, and he can build Crown, but like, you really don't want to build Crown anything earlier than the last item, and you don't even necessarily always need it. So you don't really benefit from the items that are good, and when you poke people, they benefit from Bloodthirster, because when you poke them, they attack minions, they heal up, and you become a lot less effective because of how much lifesteal there is. So Ezreal is simply a victim of the meta, in a sense that because of the Bloodthirster meta, he's simply weaker because he's a poke champion, which is also why Varus is down there, which we'll talk about in a bit. But Corki is a bit similar as well. Like, Corki is also a poke champion, which is why he's also moving down. But both of them, if you get fed, of course your poke becomes relevant, and they can't really heal it back up so easily. Then it becomes, pretty much okay. With Draven and Samira, they're basically champions where you have to snowball and win the game before hyper carries can scale. So basically, they're good if you're good at them, but against anyone in the S plus or the S tier, you're on a timer. Basically, if you don't win the game by like, or if you're not in a position to win the game by like 15 minutes in the game, like when I say position to win, I mean like, you have like maybe an inhib, you're getting like dragons, and like you have a huge lead over them. Like, if you're not in position to win the game, like if you're even at 15 minutes or if you're behind at 15 minutes, but it's pretty much no way you're gonna win the game with Samira or Draven, because you're just gonna get heavily outscaled and you're just gonna get destroyed. Maybe Samira you have a chance if the enemy team has no CC, but Draven definitely not. So Twitch is another hyper carry. I'm talking about AD Twitch, not AP Twitch, like the Bloodthirster Twitch. I've played him. I think he is pretty strong, but the issue is he's really weak in lane, and he does really decent damage in terms of an ADC, but he's a lot more predictable than Jungle Twitch, because people generally know where you are, so it's a lot less surprising, and it just works a lot worse than Jungle Twitch. But Jungle Twitch, like AP Jungle Twitch, kind of sucks now, so that's, you can't really play him there either. So he's still alright, like bottom of A+, he's still alright, but there's a lot of better options. So Vayne, in my opinion, is really bad in this meta because there's not many tanks in this meta anymore. Most of the time you find mages, of course you find ADCs. Like really like enchanters are better than tanks in the support role. Junglers generally don't play tanks, so you really only have like one tank in the top lane majority of the time. So that really doesn't play well with Vayne's playstyle. And if you are playing into non-tanks, then like Kai'Sa, Tristana, and Jinx are so much better as hyper carries than Vayne, because Vayne is really only built to attack tanks. Number 2, she can build Bloodthirster, but not as a first item. You normally go for Bloodthirster 3rd, 4th item, so you don't rush Bloodthirster, so you're not benefiting from Bloodthirster, and that's just bad. So, not too good. Lucian. really saddens me. Lucian, of course, one of my favorite champions, but he really isn't good. I've played so many matches on him, he's just lacking in damage. And like Samira and Draven are on a timer, but I just think he's even worse than Samira and Draven. He has no range. Even if you go for Cannon, which I will make a video on, and I have already done the gameplay for that. If you go for Cannon, you lack a bit of damage, you get the range, but really it's just not enough. You just don't do enough like damage. Like, of course, if you're really good at Lucian, you can still win games on him, but there are so many better options than Lucian. Same with Varus. So Varus, you have 3 builds: AP, Lethality, and On Hit. So On Hit, I'm gonna be actually making a video of On Hit Varus really soon. I actually played the game. I think On Hit Varus is pretty strong, but the thing is that if you want to play On Hit Varus like with like BT into Runans, like in that kind of On Hit build, then why not just play Jinx? You know, Jinx is just better, right? With AP, you have better AP options like AP Kaisa, AP Corki, or like Corki does AP damage, but you don't build him AP. And with Lethality, he basically has the same problem with as Ezreal, which is when you pull people down, they're just gonna heal back up, and it's not that effective. So Varus drops like he used to be like in the S tier and S plus tier, like he drops all the way down to A tier. Meta changes, things happen. So Nyla, really strong champion if you can get to like 3-4 items, but the issue is your lane is horrendous. The lane is horrendous to play. You're just gonna get destroyed by, not destroyed, but bullied by pretty much every single champion here. Yeah, honestly, just pretty much every single champion. There's really like almost no champion that you can like pretty much do well against. Maybe like a Samira, because she has to all in you and she has really low range as well. But pretty much like every champion here kind of just like smacks you around in lane, which is really tough to deal with. And last thing, we have MF and Senna. So Senna, of course, is a support. So if you're farming Senna, it's pretty bad. And MF really kind of just bottom of the pile. No safety at all. Like if you go like Lethality and Manamune, you do damage. And your ult is really a lot of your damage. So you really need to have a team with a lot of CC to lock them down for you. Not really a hyper carry, can't really 1v9. So Miss Fortune kind of the worst ADC at the moment, in my opinion. But that's pretty much it for the tier list. Of course, we have a big focus on ADCs today, because of course I reordered my list a lot. I want to explain every single champion. But thank you guys so much for watching the video, and goodbye.